Hello, welcome to this educational program by the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in the USA, AFPC-USA. I'm Patricia Vasconcelos, a board member of the association, White House correspondent for SBT Brazilian TV Network. On today's program, our news documentaries Reshaping the TV Industry. The AFPC-USA interviews Robert Frye, Emmy Award-winning producer, documentary filmmaker, and network news programs producer for over 4 decades. Bob Frye, he's already here with us. Thank you so much for being here and talking to us. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Patricia. I look forward to the conversation.
Well, his most recent film, In Search of Resolution, is the third in a series on the challenge of dealing with nuclear weapons. Robert Frye is also the director of In My Lifetime, released in 2012, and the Nuclear Requiem from 2017. Earlier in his career, Robert Frye produced broadcasts at ABC News, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and the public television in the United States. He was executive producer of ABC World News, Tonight with Peter Jennings, executive producer of Good Morning America, and the creator of World News This Morning. He founded his own independent production company in 1988. So, Bob Frye, before us diving into your latest documentaries, I would like to know what led you to invest in your own projects. If there was a particular event or maybe thought that you might remember, something that came through your mind while you were working on television, and then you thought, I'm going to invest in my own projects.
Practical necessity of carving out a new life for myself as an independent producer, director. And I will say that it's been a very good journey for that respect. I mean, look, I spent the first 25 years in network television, working, as you've already introduced, all the various places. But when it came time to finding a way as an independent, I realized that I wanted to work on subjects that interested me. And I was fortunate in that regard, in terms of being asked to do certain projects. But I think that over time, and you mentioned this latest project I've been working on now, would you believe, for 15 years on nuclear weapons. Why am I doing this? Because when I was in the Army, way back when, I had some work that I did on nuclear weapons. And so it was a project that stayed with me as I got to this point in time, 15 years ago. And I feel the reason for this project, the Nuclear World Project, and the 3 films that I've now fortunately been able to produce, is it's a story that needs to be understood by everyone in the world. It's not limited to generations. It's really about all of us. For God forbid there is any incident or explosion with nuclear weapons, it will have an impact on everyone in the world. And I feel that the reason I want to tell the story is for people to be educated about it and in some cases do something about it. I mean, for example, in Brazil, there's a gentleman that I've worked with by the name of Sergio Duarte, who was and still is involved, but he was a diplomat for the Brazilian government. And then he worked at the United Nations. And Sergio and I have become good friends. But his work has made a difference. And he is featured, by the way, in all 3 films as a voice of wisdom, if you will. And I think that people watching or listening really should understand why it is essential that the world do something about it. Of course, it's an uphill battle still, because as you know, we're talking about 9 countries that possess the weapons, and everyone else. I mean, I do a lot of filming at the UN, and other countries are involved, not as possessors of the weapons, but because they are being protected by those countries that have the weapons. But I feel it's important to let people know about it, especially for the young generations, because younger generations are going to be having this in their lives. At some point, I want to believe that there will be a way to move beyond nuclear weapons. At the moment, that's not the case.
So the Nuclear World Trilogy. So let's start with the most recent one, Bob, In Search of Resolution, that was released last year, right?
Yes.
It's a documentary that starts with an actual topic that we, foreign journalists, we are covering almost on a daily basis: the invasion of Ukraine, its implications, and the threat of nuclear weapons. We see at the very beginning, we see images of President Biden during his speech at the UN General Assembly, and he was talking about this threat. How big is this threat today from your perspective?
Unknown consequences. As you know, and you recall, when I first started this third project, there wasn't any idea that Ukraine was going to be invaded by Russia. There was no idea of a threat. In fact, if you recall in the film, the statement made by the P5, the 5 original members of the nuclear world, if you will, complex, that created the weapons first, they issued a statement through the UN saying that there will not be any nuclear war or use of nuclear weapons. Of course, that was 5 weeks before Mr. Putin gave the orders to invade Ukraine. And there we are, a whole different equation. And it helped, I think, in one way, remind the people of the vulnerability that we all face with anyone using the nuclear weapons, which Mr. Putin alluded to wanting to use, if there was any chance that the West, NATO members, decided to come into the conflict with Ukraine. Of course, the other ironies, which comes out in the film, is that Ukraine possessed nuclear weapons, but at the end of the Cold War, when they gave their weapons back, if you will, to Russia, they no longer were protected by them. And they're also not members of NATO. And so these dynamics at work bring us to where we are today, which is that we're recording this now in 2024, over 2 years since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine. And also the underlying dynamics. As you're sitting in Washington, D.C., as you know, the conflict is having its own dynamic in Washington because in the House of Representatives, controlled now by the Republicans, they refuse to provide the funding that Ukraine needs to continue to fight the war properly. So that's another example of where the underlying dynamics are unexpected. And when I started this project, none of this was part of the story, but now it's become the dominant part of the story.
And we have news related to this almost every day, right? You said at the beginning of your previous answer that one of your goals is to inform and educate society. In another film, In Search of this Search of Resolution, we listen different voices, as you said, that raise concern about this topic, and voices that also put together the information. What is the importance of educating or informing society about the threat of nuclear weapons? We talk a lot in our news packets, but to have documentaries in a more deeper way, why is so important, you believe, to inform society?
Because for younger generations particularly, but for all of us, they're living with this. And my desire is not to try to persuade people, but rather to inform people, because I feel that it is necessary for the information to be out there. How it unfolds, look, you're living in the capital of the United States in Washington, D.C. Every day there's another shifting dynamic and struggle on any number of topics. And nuclear is just one of them. As I said, as we both introduced this idea with the conflict in Ukraine, nuclear weapons have come back into play, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago, before the P5, the five original nuclear weapon states
Mm-hmm.
made this declaration, it was off the table, if you will. There wasn't any problem. But now people realize that there is a problem. And so how does one, in your position or my position as a documentary producer, how do you tell people the story? The question then becomes, are people going to pay attention or do something about it?
Mm-hmm.
That's something that neither you or I in your reporting or I in my documentary,
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell people what to do, but rather we put the information out there. And every day, as you describe, your ongoing challenge is how do you report what's going on that particular day?
Mm-hmm.
But in the long term, there has to be, I think, deeper information. But that's very much up to the responsibility of the viewer, the listener, the reader. You know, they have to become, I have come up with a new idea. Folks have to become their own editors,
Mm-hmm.
gathering whatever information they get. And look, every day you make decisions about how you're going to tell the story that is before you. And, you know, we now are in a world, and all the folks that are part of your organization, the challenge is what information can they provide to the folks in their country? That's really the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
How to tell the story accurately and with depth and definition in a way that will be helpful to the listener, the viewer, the reader.
Mm-hmm.
We can't, I think that what we do is tell that.
Mm-hmm. Another work from this trilogy is In My Lifetime, a presentation of the Nuclear World Project. And there you state that the film is meant to be a wake-up call for humanity. And at the beginning of this film, viewers can read, on the one hand, there is a longing for peace in the hearts of millions. On the other hand, powerful inner forces impel world leaders to carry on an arms race they cannot halt. That was in 2012, if I'm correct, and it fits the reality we have today, Robert. Do you see today a real effort, though, for peace?
I see today a real desire for peace on the part of millions of people.
Uh-huh.
But the possessors of the weapons are in a position to make the decision whether peace will be allowed, if you will, in a way that is available to societies. And of course, as you know from your reporting on a day-to-day basis, the conflicts around the world, there are numerous conflicts going on around the world. That desire for peace and that quote that I used at the beginning of In My Lifetime is still applicable, but I think it's not within reach at the moment because of the numerous conflicts. I mean, take what's going on in Gaza, take what's going on in Southeast Asia, take what's going on, you know, name a place in the world. There is some underlying conflict. I mean, the situation in Haiti. I mean, there's an awful lot of challenges that preoccupy people that live in these different places. And, you know, how do we create a space for the notion of peace? That's a question that you have to deal with in terms of how you file your reports every day.
Yes.
So it's a kind of, this is an unwieldy answer I'm giving you, but I think it's a challenge. We have to continue to do our work in whatever form that we do it, and at the same time understand that there are too many surprises taking place in the world, and we don't know, we can't predict what the outcome will be.
The messages you put in each work, there are some similarities as far as I can see. The Nuclear Requiem from 2017, there is a similar message, an awareness. But what makes this film unique, this one from 2017? Is there something that you wanted to highlight in the Nuclear Requiem, something that it might be more specific?
Well, I mean, there were several pieces, as you in the Nuclear Requiem, that had to do with many of the dynamics at that time. The United States and Russia were talking with each other. At that time, the situation in Iran was different. And then we had a new president in the United States. At that time, changes became apparent with the situation in Iran. At that time, North Korea started more testing. They started more sending rockets into space. At this time that we're now living in 2024, there is even more unpredictability because of the conflicts we've already talked about. True. So every moment has its time, if you will. And also, obviously, what's going on here in the United States with the upcoming presidency. But this is not the only election taking place in the world at this time. There are elections, so in terms of Russia, as has been pointed out, just had what really was an anointment of Mr. Putin. So at this time, there are other definitions about what folks are able to do in terms of voting. And I think what we're concerned about in this country is what will unfold with our election. But then you look at the other elections taking place around the world. Everyone is living in this time in different ways. And the challenge for you, and in some respects for me as a documentary producer, although I have more long-term goals as I've done these films, your challenge is on a day-to-day basis, what do you capture? What's the zeitgeist? What's the mood? What are the facts taking place? And as you look at those, at this time, we're living in this environment that seems to be shifting constantly and in many respects is unpredictable. And each country, each nation, each region is dealing with all these different ideas.
And now looking into our market, I mean, you put those three works, the last one released last year. How do you see the market today in television here in the United States, free-to-air cable channel, in terms of offering a space for this type of documentaries? Do you have a feeling that this is a market that is growing? I mean, where to broadcast those works?
Well, look, when I first started off in this business, actually 5 decades ago, it was a different space. There were 3 networks, television networks in the United States. Now there are cable channels. There are different political points of view being presented.
Yeah.
And how do you create an environment where you get your message through? I mean, I can only take responsibility for what I'm doing and try to present something in a representative way that I feel pertains to a particular story. And having worked in network news before, same deal then. But that shift has taken place in the last 20, 25 years. There are multitudes of spaces, and people go to where they want to watch what they feel represents their point of view. Of course, the other thing is you start looking at all these different kinds of things, TikTok, whatever. No one's consuming the same story. They're looking at things from their own perspectives more often than not. And do people read any longer? What happens with emails? I mean, you pick whatever you're doing. But again, it's the same thing for you, the same challenge for you as it is for me in that regard. You do your story in the best way you possibly can.
Mhm.
You send it back to your home country. And the folks that watch your report, that's good. But they're also being drawn to other forms of communications. And that's the great challenge, is that who really takes the time? But I, as you, cannot worry about that at the time that you're doing your work. You can, and if it's only a small group of people, so be it. And that's what I've done with these films. I've been able to distribute them by public television in this country, as well as educational formats. So you do what you can do, you put it out there, and hopefully the folks that are accessing it will take the time to watch it. Our responsibility is to do the story in a way that we can, as accurately as we can, but we can't force people to watch, read, listen, depending on whatever format we're talking about, but we can put it out there. But it is now a sea of if you will, a roiling sea of information and concepts that are presented. And that's where I have this message, and I think I've already mentioned it. The idea everyone has to become their own editor to sort out the confusion. But that's for another conversation. But that's the way I look at it.
And in which extent do you think that the experience in television help or might help a documentary maker? Because there are a lot of similarities, but they are different products at the end, right?
Rephrase that question, please.
In which extent an experience that a journalist have while working in television, doing TV journalism, in which extent this experience can help, or how this journalist can use, this professional can use this experience while doing documentary making? Because the work we produce as new packages for television is one thing, and a documentary is another thing. Is it valid to use this experience that some colleagues that might be listening to us now, that they work for television, to use this experience in documentary filmmaking if they want to pursue this?
Yes.
In which extent the knowledge we have while doing television can be used for documentary making, or do you believe that is a completely different,
No, look, my feeling about the business we're in, you and I, and everyone else probably that will be listening or watching this, is whatever form it takes, the work is the same. It boils down to one thing from my vantage point: storytelling.
Okay.
And whatever aspect of storytelling you're doing is another form. I mean, for example, the storytelling you're doing today can lead to a larger piece down the road. But it's a matter of if your basis is the form that you're working with, as long as your story being told is told well, it's a record. It's a diary of the day's work. But if you look over the next month, that diary is going to be built of many different bricks, if you will. And so how do you take pieces that you report and put it into a larger piece? It's all a form, really.
Yes,
And it's all about storytelling. So I think that's the way I would look at your question, that if I understand it properly. What you do today over the next 30 days will be another brick in terms of what you are, the kind of structure you're building for the future.
No, yeah, and I ask this because this is something that I particularly I like to do documentaries, and I find difficult to find space and time in my daily life, and I believe that many colleagues might maybe face the same challenge, and maybe I think all the knowledge I already have is enough, but maybe not. I need to study more and try to learn, different techniques. But you were right. It's all about the structure and it's all about storytelling. And what are your future projects? Is there something that you can or you want to share with us? Is it related to the theme of the previous three documentaries, or the project now is just to distribute this one that you released last year?
The answer to that question is I've been doing this work now for
Mhm.
62 years.
Of course.
Um, I'm still interested in storytelling,
Mhm.
and I'm working on a project that will be part of the Nuclear World project.
Mhm.
And also one of the companies I work with, I have several distributors, and I'm working with them now on making sure that the films being shown are seen in educational environments as well as broadcast environments. And what I'm working on is having those ideas presented in educational formats as well for dialogues and conversations. Because I feel, look, I have the resources because the work of the three films leads to a larger historical component, not only for the present and but the future.
Mhm.
But I guess it's easy to say, oh, well, that's enough. But the reality is storytelling is never enough. Some people just decide to retire and say, thank you very much. And others, such as myself, there are things that I can do within the environment that I've been working in, and fortunate enough to be able to tell the various stories over the course of time. I was at a dinner last night and talking to a group of people, and uh, two of them actually had been involved in what happened in Germany in World War II. Obviously, they're a certain age. And listening to their telling their stories and what they went through leads to other ideas. Because I think we all, in our own way, and whether we're in this business that we're in, no matter what part of the business that we're in, gives one ideas to work with in the future. And for you in your work, where you presently are in Washington, reporting back to your home countries and that part of the world, there are ideas that you can work with as you gather more information and footage to do other things with it. So it's all, I hope this is understandable. It's all a matter of whether or not you enjoy the work you do. And I happen to enjoy storytelling. So
I can
as
feel
the
it.
old, yeah,
Ultimate satisfaction way.
well, look, as the old saying goes, stay tuned.
You already answered the question I was about to ask, but I'm going to ask either way because maybe you have something else to add, because our audience is mainly foreign journalists
Yes.
and many students as well that they are, pursuing this career. So what would you say for those who are or working in a daily basis as foreign correspondents here in the United States, or those who are studying journalism and they want to pursue this career of documentary filmmaking? Anything you would like to say to them?
Continue doing their work.
Mhm.
I mean, look, I didn't mention, but the website for this project is
Oh, yes.
thenuclearworld.org.
Can you repeat, please, Robert?
The Nuclear World, remember thenuclearworld.org.
Okay.
There's a lot of material in there that people can look at, as well as historical elements as well. But I would encourage everyone continue doing the work as bedraggled as one can be on a day-to-day basis because of the craziness of what we used to call the horse race of the political situation in the United States. Your take on it, you and your colleagues, is important in understanding what the underlying dynamics are. And also, since we're talking now in March of 2024, and the election in the United States, which you're covering, takes place in November, from now to November, Godspeed.
Yes, we have 8 months to go. Such a pleasure to talk to you, to meet you virtually, and to spend this time and learn from you, Robert. Thank you so much for making yourself, available for this interview. Thank you so much.
And I appreciate the opportunity, Patricia, and I wish you well in the coming months and years. And thank you to the foreign correspondents for the continuing work that you do.
Thank you so much. I spoke today with Robert Frye, Emmy Award-winning producer, documentary filmmaker, and network news programs producer for over 4 decades. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.